The storm was no ordinary storm. It ripped through the night like a beast unleashed, its thunder shaking the ground, its lightning clawing at the heavens. Rain lashed the land, and the wind roared as if trying to warn the world of what was to come. In the heart of this chaos, hidden within a dark cave near the river Nid, a child was born, a child whose arrival seemed to command the storm itself. They said no storm like it had ever been seen before, and none would be seen again. When the child was lifted into the flickering firelight, the midwife gasped and crossed herself, her eyes wide with terror. The baby had a crooked nose, a wide mouth, and eyes. Those eyes that gleamed with a strange, unnatural intelligence. Outside, the storm calmed in an instant, as if satisfied its dark work was done. Whispers later spread like wildfire. "The devil's daughter," they said, "a child born of shadow and storm." But no one dared speak too loudly, because who knew what the child might hear? As Ursula grew, so did the fear. Animals would bolt at her approach, and windows were shuttered when she passed. The villagers avoided the path near the cave, whispering of strange voices heard at night, and lights that danced like spirits above the trees. But what truly chilled them was the prophecy, the one the old hermit spoke of before he disappeared forever. "The child born of storm shall see the fall of kings and the ruin of great men. Beware her words, for they shall shape the end of all things." Who was Ursula Shipton? A girl? A monster? Or a messenger of doom? And so the legend began. But this was just the beginning. For Ursula, Mother Shipton, as she would be called, had yet to speak her first prophecy. And when she did, the world would never be the same. What power did she truly hold? And how would she change the course of history? As the years passed, the signs only grew stranger. The river near the cave, once clear and full of fish, began to run dark and sluggish when Ursula approached. Birds would fall silent on their branches, and even the fiercest dogs whimpered and backed away from her path. The villagers said she spoke to the trees, and that sometimes the trees seemed to listen. On stormy nights, strange figures were seen standing on the cliffs above the river, shapes too large and misshapen to be human, watching the village below. One winter night, a traveling merchant sought shelter at the village inn. Over mugs of ale, he laughed at the villagers' fears. A girl? A monster? Nonsense! Superstition and shadows, he scoffed. But as he left the next morning, passing near the cave, his horse reared in terror, throwing him into the mud. Later, his body was found near the river, his face frozen in an expression of unspeakable horror. No wound marked him, no sign of violence, only his wide, staring eyes, and a single word scratched into the earth beside him: warned. Ursula's mother, long accused of witchcraft, tried to shield her daughter from the villagers' hatred, but even she could not explain the strange things that happened around the child. Fires would flicker and die when Ursula entered a room. Milk curdled, bread refused to rise, and always that sense of being watched by unseen eyes. When Ursula's mother died, some said of heartbreak, others of fear, the girl was left alone in the world. But the cave, the river, and the woods seemed to claim her as their own. They began calling her Mother Shipton, even then though she was only a child, as if they sensed the future she would grow into, a seer, a prophetess, a woman who would foretell doom and destiny alike. But what the villagers feared most was not the girl's strange powers. It was what she might reveal about them. What secrets could she see hidden behind their locked doors and whispered sins? And in the dark corners of their hearts, they all wondered. What would happen the day Mother Shipton chose to speak? That day would come sooner than they feared. And when it did, no king, no noble, no common soul would be untouched by the shadow of her words. For the storm that heralded her birth had not ended. It had only begun to gather strength. And when it broke at last, it would change the world forever. The villagers spoke often in hushed voices about the cave, but none dared approach its mouth after sunset. They said strange lights flickered within, and voices, soft, pleading voices, echoed out, though no one was seen to enter or leave. On stormy nights, the cave seemed to hum, as if it drew its breath from the storm itself. And Ursula? She grew tall and slender, with wild dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Her gaze unsettled even the bravest hunter, for it was as if she saw both the man and the sins that clung to him like smoke. One autumn evening, as the full moon rose blood-red over the hills, a child went missing. The villagers scoured the woods and riverbanks by torchlight, their cries swallowed by the night. They found no trace, only a small shoe caught between the roots of an ancient tree, and strange symbols scratched into the bark above it. They blamed Ursula. They said she had called the woods to take the child. They said she had spoken to the night, and the night had obeyed. But in truth, Ursula herself watched from the shadows, tears streaking her face, powerless to stop whatever ancient force had stirred. The next day, the village elders gathered at dawn, their faces pale with dread. They decided Ursula must be driven out, lest greater evil befall them. But when they came to the cave, they found it empty, as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. From that day forward, the storm seemed fiercer, the harvests poorer, and the nights longer. The villagers whispered that they had not banished her. They had unleashed her, but Ursula was not gone. She had retreated deeper into the wilderness, to places where no man dared go, to forgotten groves, crumbling ruins, and ancient standing stones, worn smooth by the passage of time. And there the old voices found her. They whispered in dreams and waking visions. They showed her futures yet to come, of kings brought low, cities in flames, and the end of empires. She did not understand it all, but she knew this. She had been marked by fate, and when she returned, she would not come as the frightened child they had cast out. One night, as frost silvered the world, Ursula stepped from the shadows and stood at the edge of the village. Those who saw her swore she glowed faintly in the moonlight, as if the night itself had crowned her its queen. And though no word passed her lips that night, every soul who met her gaze felt the weight of destiny pressing upon them. And the villagers knew, in their hearts, that Mother Shipton's time had come. The question that haunted them now was not if she would speak, but when, and what doom or deliverance her words would bring. Winter deepened, and the village seemed frozen in more than snow and ice. At night, strange sounds echoed from the forests, low, mournful wails, like the crying of a lost soul, or perhaps the wind itself mourning what was to come. Children awoke from nightmares, claiming they saw a woman at their window, watching with eyes like molten silver. And always, the villagers felt it, the invisible weight of something drawing closer. They spoke no more of banishing Ursula. Instead, they prayed their doors would hold, their hearths would stay warm, and that they might be spared her gaze. One night, under a sky splintered by lightning, a stranger came to the village. A wandering friar, weary and mud-streaked, seeking shelter. But when he heard the villagers' fearful talk of the girl in the woods, of the visions, of the missing child, He paled. "This is no common witch," he whispered. "I have heard of such a one, born beneath a curse, gifted with the sight of the end of days. If she speaks, the world will listen." And so it was that fear turned to dread. The villagers realized that the child they had driven out might now wield power beyond their imagining. Power that might judge them all. The friar set out the next morning, determined to find Ursula and plead for the village's safety. He carried a wooden cross, a leather-bound Bible, and a pouch of salt, the old protections against dark forces. But the woods seemed to swallow him. The villagers watched from afar as he passed into the trees, and he did not return. Days turned to weeks, and still no sign of him. Some said the forest kept him. Others whispered that he had found her, and that she had shown him visions so terrible he chose never to return. As spring approached, Ursula began to appear more often, not in the village, but in the hills above, at dawn or twilight, standing silent among the standing stones. Shepherds spoke of seeing her raise her arms to the sky as if in prayer, while storms gathered on the horizon. And then, one fateful evening, as thunder rolled over the hills, her voice was heard for the first time. A single word carried on the wind: "Beware." No one knew what doom it warned of, but from that night on, no soul in the village slept easy, for they felt sure that the prophecy of Mother Shipton had begun. Night after night, the villagers began to hear another sound carried on the wind, not the mournful wail of the storm or the distant bark of foxes, but something else, something like a low melodic chanting. It was as if the hills themselves were humming with ancient words long forgotten. Some claimed it was Ursula calling upon forces best left undisturbed. Others believed it was the land itself, awakened by her presence. The oldest of the villagers spoke in hushed tones of the standing stones that dotted the hills, relics of an age before memory. Those stones, they said, were never meant for mortal hands to touch, nor for witches to summon what sleeps beneath. Then came the night of the blood moon. The sky turned red as if the heavens themselves bled. The villagers barricaded their doors, nailed charms of rowan and iron above their thresholds, and clutched their children tight. Far on the hilltop, silhouetted against the blood-colored sky, stood Ursula, and those brave enough to peek through cracks in their shutters swore they saw figures gathering around her, shadowy, tall, and silent, as if summoned from beyond the veil. The next morning, no trace of footprints could be found on the dew-soaked grass. After that night, misfortunes began to fall upon the village. Livestock were found dead in the fields, their eyes wide with terror. Crops blackened before the harvest. A sickness spread, leaving the strongest men pale and weak. Desperation took root. Some whispered of forming a band to climb the hills and end Ursula's curse once and for all. But none dared. Every time they set out, storms would rise, fierce and sudden, driving them back with wind and hail, as if the land itself conspired to protect her. And still, Ursula's voice was heard, not in anger but in sorrow. The words carried on the wind were no longer warnings but lamentations. "The doom is not mine to give. The doom is of your making." What did she mean? None knew, but fear and guilt warred in every heart. Was she the cause of their suffering, or merely the herald of a punishment they had brought upon themselves? Then one night, as a storm lashed the village and lightning split the sky, a child went missing. A small boy, son of the blacksmith, vanished without a trace. The villagers searched the woods, the riverbanks, the hills, but found nothing. At dawn, his mother claimed to see Ursula at the edge of the forest, the boy in her arms. But when they reached the spot, there was no sign, only a single small footprint in the mud, and the mark of a staff pressed deep into the earth beside it. As the boy's disappearance weighed heavily on the hearts of the villagers, a dense fog descended upon the land, thicker and colder than any they had known. Days passed, and the sun became a pale memory. It was as though the world itself held its breath, waiting for something or someone. At night, strange lights flickered atop the hills, dancing like will-o'-the-wisps, and the sound of unseen flutes echoed faintly through the mist. Desperation drove the villagers to send for a priest from York, a man of stern faith, known for his battles against witchcraft. When he arrived, the land itself seemed to tremble. His presence stirred the wind, and the animals grew restless. The priest declared that Ursula's soul was lost, that she must be banished to save them all. But as they prepared to confront her, the earth shook with a deep rumble, and from the hills, a voice echoed, a voice not Ursula's, but something far older, far darker. The sin is not hers, but yours. That night, the villagers dreamed as one. They saw a vision of Ursula standing upon the tallest hill, her arms raised to the storm. Lightning flashed, revealing shapes behind her, giants of mist and shadow, their eyes burning like coals. The vision ended with a single word whispered into every dreamer's ear: repent. When morning came, the villagers awoke shaken, their courage drained. None dared speak of banishment again. In the following days, Ursula vanished from sight. The fog lifted, but the villagers found no relief, for the land had changed. The river's course shifted overnight. The ancient oak by the church split down the middle, as if struck by an invisible hand. Stones that had lain undisturbed for centuries were found cracked and blackened. It was as if the world was reshaping itself in response to some hidden force. And still, they waited. For what? They did not know. Then, as suddenly as she had disappeared, Ursula returned. She came not as a witch to be feared, but as a prophet, with eyes alight with visions. She spoke of great events that would shake kings from their thrones, of fires that would consume cities, and of ships that would sail without sails, carried by forces unseen. But she ended with a warning that chilled the soul of every man and woman who heard it. The day will come when this land will drown, not by sea, but by the sins of those who rule it. Word of Ursula's visions spread like wildfire beyond the village. Travelers carried tales of the strange woman of Knaresborough, born in a cave and touched by storm and shadow. At first, the nobles of the land laughed at such peasant superstition. But soon, as distant events began to mirror her warnings, laughter turned to unease. A great storm sank a fleet bound for France, just as she had foretold. A plague swept through a noble house she had named in her riddles. In York, and even in London, whispers of Mother Shipton began to circulate among the court. Some dismissed her as a mad crone, but others feared she might be a true prophet, or worse, an agent of the devil. The king's advisors debated what should be done. Should she be silenced? Should she be summoned? As these debates raged, Ursula's legend only grew. Ursula, meanwhile, remained in her humble cave, visited now by pilgrims, the desperate, and the curious. She gave counsel in riddles, speaking of the rise and fall of great houses, of rivers turning to blood, and of fire raining from the sky. Each prophecy seemed more ominous than the last, and yet all who came to her left with the same haunted expression, as if they had glimpsed something no mortal should see. Then came the day when an emissary from the crown rode to Knaresborough. His banner snapped in the wind, bearing the royal arms. He came not with an army, but with a summons. Mother Shipton was to appear at court. The villagers watched in silence as Ursula, calm as ever, accepted. "The stones have spoken," she said quietly, "and the hour is near." As Ursula began her journey to court, the land itself seemed to react. A strange hush fell over the fields. Birds took flight in great, swirling flocks. The sky darkened, though no storm approached. It was as though nature itself braced for what was to come. And all the while, Ursula rode silently, her gaze fixed on distant horizons, seeing perhaps what none else could see. The journey to London was long and fraught with strange omens. Along the winding roads, Ursula and her escort passed villages where wells had inexplicably run dry, fields where crops had withered to ash, though no blight had been seen. Peasants fell to their knees at the sight of her, whispering prayers or curses under their breath. Some crossed themselves, others fled to their homes, barring the doors behind them. It was as if the land itself recognized that prophecy was on the move. One night, as they camped near the ruins of an old abbey, Ursula sat apart from the men, staring into the embers of the fire. The soldiers avoided her gaze, unsettled by her silence, but those awake claimed they heard her muttering in a strange tongue, as if speaking to spirits only she could see. And when morning came, frost covered the ground, though it was the heart of summer. As they neared the capital, the city rose like a dark crown against the dawn. Smoke from 1,000 hearths stained the sky. Ursula's expression remained unreadable, but those riding with her swore later that the wind carried her words. A city of stone, but not of peace. Blood will flow in these streets before the end. And with that, she pressed onward, leaving the men chilled despite the summer sun. At court, Ursula's arrival caused an uproar. Nobles craned their necks to glimpse the famed seeress. Some mocked her, whispering behind jeweled hands. But others watched with fear, as if expecting doom to follow her footsteps. The king received her in his great hall, his face pale but composed. "So," he said, voice echoing in the chamber, "the Witch of Knaresborough comes to my hall. What doom do you bring me, woman?" Ursula's reply was quiet, but carried through the hall as if borne on a wind. "Not I, Majesty, but the world itself brings your doom. I merely give it voice." Gasps echoed through the court. She spoke then of a fire that would consume the city, of betrayal within the king's own walls, and of foreign banners flying over English soil. Each word struck like a hammer blow, and the king's hand trembled on the arm of his throne. The king, trying to mask his fear, commanded her to leave. But Ursula only smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Your order is of no use, sire. The tide has turned. You may bar the doors, but the storm will find its way in." With that, she turned and departed, the great doors slamming shut behind her as if by unseen hands. The court remained silent long after she was gone, the weight of her words heavy in the air. Outside the palace walls, Ursula walked alone through the city's narrow streets, the stone beneath her feet slick with morning mist. Market stalls stood abandoned, the usual chatter and clamor replaced by a strange hush that seemed to follow her. A stray dog, ribs showing through its mangy fur, slunk into an alley at her passing, and the few townsfolk who glimpsed her face turned away, making the sign of the cross or muttering charms against evil. As she reached the edge of the city, Ursula paused upon a small stone bridge spanning the Thames. There, with the river flowing black beneath her, she seemed to fall into a trance, her eyes fixed on the water's surface. The wind picked up, carrying her whispered words across the ripples. "The river shall carry away the innocent and the guilty alike. Fire above, flood below, and none shall be spared." A fisherman nearby froze where he stood, dropping his net into the river. In the days that followed, Ursula became a figure of dread and fascination. Wherever she went, crowds gathered at a distance, too afraid to approach, but too curious to look away. Children were kept indoors. The city's priests debated in hushed voices whether she was a messenger of God or an agent of the devil himself. And all the while, Ursula spoke her visions to no one directly, but to the wind, to the river, to the very stones of the city, as if London itself were her audience. One storm-lashed evening, she found shelter in the crypt of a ruined chapel on the city's outskirts. Lightning split the sky, revealing the shattered cross atop the chapel, while thunder rolled over the city. There, among crumbling tombs and bones long forgotten, she scrawled strange symbols into the dirt with a stick, speaking names that no living soul recognized. Witnesses claimed the storm grew fiercer with every word she spoke, as if the heavens themselves were listening or answering. Word of Ursula's deeds reached beyond the city walls. Nobles, bishops, and even foreign envoys came hoping to witness her powers or to learn their fate. But she would grant no private audiences. "My words are not for men of power," she said, "but for the world that power will ruin." And so the tension in London grew, the court uneasy, the common folk restless, all waiting for the day when the seer's dark visions would come to pass. That night, as the city slept, a great bell tolled, though no hand touched it. The sound echoed across rooftops and through silent streets, awakening fears buried deep. And those who looked from their windows swore they saw Ursula, standing atop the city walls, her silhouette black against the storm-lit sky, her arms raised in a gesture of warning or perhaps of summoning. The next morning, the city awoke to find strange markings along the Thames' muddy banks. Symbols none could decipher, as if drawn by unseen hands during the storm. Fishermen refused to cast their nets, claiming the river had turned sour and cursed overnight. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some spoke of demons rising from the depths, others of Ursula summoning forces beyond mortal comprehension. Meanwhile, within the royal court, tension mounted. Advisors argued over what should be done about the seer. Some called for her arrest, branding her a witch who sowed panic. Others counseled caution, fearful that angering her might bring doom upon the city. The king himself, weary and wary, stared out from his tower, watching the storm clouds that still loomed on the horizon, as if searching for answers in their swirling depths. That night, Ursula appeared at the city's ancient crossroads where once druids had gathered. By the flickering light of a single lantern, she spoke aloud her most chilling prophecy yet. "Steel shall split the land. Fire shall devour it. The sky will burn, the ground will quake, and from the ashes, a new tyrant shall rise." Her voice, carried on the wind, seemed to echo through the empty streets, reaching every corner of the city. In the days that followed, signs of unease swept through London. The river rose, flooding cellars and streets. Strange lights were seen in the sky, flickering orbs that hovered and vanished. Livestock sickened without cause. People muttered prayers beneath their breath as they went about their work, casting anxious glances toward the city's edges where Ursula had last been seen. A final, unsettling event sealed Ursula's name into legend. On the eve of the summer solstice, she was seen walking the battlements of the old Roman wall at twilight. She paused at each corner, laying a hand upon the stone, and whispered words no one could hear. Some say the stones themselves seemed to sigh in answer, and the air grew cold, though the sun still lingered on the horizon. From that night forward, she was never seen again within the city. Some claimed she had vanished into the earth itself. Others swore she had been taken by the spirits she summoned. But her words remained, etched in the minds of all who heard them. Warnings of fire, flood, and tyrants yet to come. And as the first of the disasters she foretold began to unfold, London remembered the seer who had tried to warn them. Weeks passed, but the memory of Ursula's chilling prophecies refused to fade. Londoners found themselves unable to sleep, haunted by dreams of fire consuming the city, of steel beasts tearing up the earth, and of shadows wearing crowns. In marketplaces and taverns, her name was whispered as both a warning and a curse. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the storm she had foretold. One fog-laden dawn, a group of cloaked figures approached the ruins of an ancient Druid stone circle on the outskirts of the city. They were said to be scholars, desperate to decipher the strange markings that had appeared on buildings and streets since Ursula's disappearance. By the dim light of lanterns, they traced the carvings, their fingers trembling as the realization dawned. The symbols were maps, not of places, but of events yet to come. At the same time, in the king's council chamber, fear had turned to fury. "She has bewitched the city," cried one lord, slamming his fist upon the oak table. "If we do not act, disaster will be upon us." Others urged caution, arguing that to pursue Ursula would only fulfill the doom she had prophesied. The king, hollow-eyed and weary, could give no answer. The weight of unseen forces pressed upon his soul. The city itself seemed to rebel. Cracks appeared in the ancient walls. Church bells rang out without mortal hand to pull the rope. A great oak tree near the city gate, ancient beyond memory, suddenly split in two with a sound like thunder. Superstitious terror gripped a people who now saw Ursula not just as a seer, but as the harbinger of London's ruin. And then came the night that would mark the turning point, a night when the moon rose blood-red over the city, and the air was so still it felt as if time itself had paused. From the depths of the city, a strange hum began to rise, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to come from the very stones beneath their feet. Those who heard it swore the earth itself was speaking, echoing the warnings of the vanished seer. In that stillness, a lone rider galloped through the city streets, spreading word of an approaching army, a tyrant from across the sea who sought to claim the crown. The first of Ursula's prophecies was beginning to take shape, and London trembled on the edge of chaos. As word of the invading force spread, panic gripped the city like a vice. Families gathered what little they could carry, fleeing towards the countryside. But no road seemed safe. The air was thick with smoke from countless hearths left untended, and the night was alive with the sound of weeping and hurried footsteps. The city, once proud and defiant, seemed to shrink under the weight of impending doom. Amid the chaos, rumors swirled of a cloaked figure seen walking along the banks of the River Thames. Some said it was Ursula herself, returned to witness the fulfillment of her dark visions. Others believed it was a spirit, or worse, an omen sent to ensure the city's fall. Wherever this figure passed, dogs howled and crows took flight in great black clouds. The royal court, once filled with lavish feasts and the sound of music, had fallen into a fearful silence. Servants moved like ghosts through the halls, and the nobles stood only glance at one another with suspicion. Every knock at the door, every creak of the timbers overhead seemed to herald disaster. The king himself stood at a high window, staring down at the city he loved, powerless to stop the tide that had been set in motion. And then, just before dawn, came a sign no one could ignore. A great storm swept in from the sea, as if the heavens themselves raged at what was to come. Lightning split the sky again and again, casting the city in stark, flickering relief. And with each thunderclap, It seemed the stones of London trembled, as if acknowledging the seer's grim predictions. Yet even in this darkest hour, hope had not fully fled. In hidden corners of the city, small groups gathered, speaking softly of how Ursula's words might yet guide them to salvation rather than ruin. They spoke of deciphering the remaining symbols, of seeking the cave where the prophetess was said to have been born, hoping to find answers before it was too late. As dawn's first light broke through the storm clouds, it revealed a city changed forever. Streets were littered with debris, shattered signs, overturned carts, broken roof tiles. The River Thames, swollen from the night's rain, churned angrily, threatening to spill over its banks. And in that pale light, the faces of London's people seemed haunted, eyes wide with exhaustion, lips moving silently in prayer. In the marketplace, where once vendors had hawked wares and laughter had echoed, now only silence reigned. The stalls stood abandoned, goods left to rot or scatter in the wind. And at the center of the square, carved crudely into the wood of a post, someone had scrawled a chilling message. The seer warned us. We did not listen. Meanwhile, high atop the city's tallest tower, the royal astrologer pored over ancient charts and scrolls, his fingers trembling. He traced the lines of forgotten constellations, desperate to see some sign, some glimmer of hope. But the stars, hidden by storm clouds, offered no guidance. Only darkness stared back at him. And he knew in his heart that the hour Ursula spoke of was near. In the shadows of the great cathedral, another figure moved quietly, one of the secret band seeking Ursula's truth. A young scribe named Thomas clutched a tattered piece of parchment, said to bear one of her original prophecies. His breath came in shallow gasps as he hurried through the nave, the echoes of his footsteps merging with the sound of distant thunder. And far beyond the city's crumbling walls, the invaders gathered on the muddy fields, their banners whipped in the gale, their armor dull beneath the gray sky. The commander, his face hidden beneath a heavy helm, raised a gauntleted hand toward the city. The time had come, he thought, the time when the old prophecies would see their end, or their beginning. But even as all seemed lost, there was still a flicker of defiance. In hidden rooms, in quiet hearts, in whispered vows, the spirit of London remained unbroken. And as the storm clouds slowly parted, a single ray of sunlight pierced through, casting its light on the cathedral's highest spire, as if to remind all who saw it that hope, though fragile, still endured. The sky above London burned crimson as dawn surrendered to a strange, unsettling light. Clouds still churned in angry spirals, but beneath them, the city seemed to hold its breath. The streets were eerily quiet, no children's laughter, no clatter of hooves, no chatter of merchants. It was as if all of London knew that this day would mark the fulfillment of ancient words spoken long ago. In the great hall of the royal palace, tension crackled like lightning. The king's advisors stood in tight clusters, voices low, faces pale. The king himself sat upon his throne, gripping the armrest so hard that his knuckles whitened. Before him lay an open scroll, Ursula's prophecy, its words smudged and faded, but still legible. When fire rains from the sky and rivers run red, the end shall walk among you. Outside the palace gates, the first signs of the prophecy's unfolding began. The river, swollen from the storms, carried strange debris. Tree limbs blackened as if scorched, the bodies of animals swept from distant villages, their fur singed. And as the watchers along the banks stared in horror, the water seemed to darken further, taking on the color of rust or blood. Then, from beyond the city walls, the invaders made their move. Flaming projectiles soared through the sky, their trails of fire like comets falling to earth. They struck homes and marketplaces, sending up columns of black smoke that coiled into the heavens. Screams echoed as people fled, clutching children and what few possessions they could carry. Deep beneath the cathedral, Thomas the scribe stood in the crypt, his lantern casting trembling shadows on ancient tombs. He unrolled the parchment again, his eyes scanning the final lines of Ursula's prophecy. His breath quickened as he realized the truth. The fires above were only the beginning. The true danger, Ursula warned, would rise not from the enemy beyond the walls, but from within the city itself. As the city burned and the invaders pressed their advantage, a strange rumbling began deep within the earth. The ground trembled beneath the feet of soldiers and citizens alike. Stone walls cracked, towers swayed, and from hidden fissures rose jets of scalding steam. Ursula's final warning echoed in Thomas's mind. The land itself shall rebel, and from its depths the doom of kings shall rise. The king, now desperate, called for his fastest riders. Messages were to be sent to every corner of the kingdom, calling for aid. But as his messengers galloped from the palace, they found the roads already blocked by fire, by falling stone, by the chaos that had overtaken London. The city was trapped, its fate sealed within walls that now seemed more like a prison. And yet, in the midst of destruction, the cathedral's great bell began to toll, not in mourning, but in defiance. Its deep voice rang out across the city, a reminder that hope had not yet fled. Thomas, standing beneath the shattered stained glass, felt its vibrations in his bones and knew the city would not fall without a final stand. The firestorm raged on. From the highest spires to the lowliest hovels, London was engulfed in chaos. Ash fell like snow, coating rooftops and cloaks alike, turning day into night. The streets teemed with frightened citizens, their faces streaked with soot and tears. The cries of the wounded mingled with the roar of the flames, and above it all, the cathedral bell tolled like a heartbeat of defiance. High atop the city walls, the king's archers loosed arrow after arrow at the shadowy figures of the invaders, their flaming tips streaking through the smoke-filled air. But for every enemy that fell, another took their place, driven by some unseen fury. Below, the king's guards tried desperately to hold the gates, their shields blackened by the heat, their swords dulled by endless combat. Thomas emerged from the cathedral's crypt, his face pale with realization. In his trembling hands he clutched not just Ursula's prophecy, but another, hidden scroll he had found deep among the tombs. This scroll spoke of an ancient ritual, one that might yet save the city, but at a terrible price. His voice shook as he read aloud the final line. One life freely given to quench the fires of wrath. Elsewhere in the city, an old woman, cloaked and bent by age, stood unmoving in the central square, watching the devastation unfold. Her eyes, sharp and clear despite the years, reflected the flames. Some said she was a seer, others whispered of witchcraft. As the people fled past her, she raised her hands to the sky and spoke words lost to time, as if calling upon forgotten powers. A sudden wind swept through London, not the hot, choking wind of the fire, but something else. It carried the scent of rain, of rivers unspoiled by blood, of hope. The clouds overhead churned faster, and a low rumble of thunder echoed across the heavens. Eyes turned skyward as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, hissing as they struck the smoldering ruins. But the rain alone would not be enough. Thomas knew it in his bones. The fires of fate had been set, and only the sacrifice of the willing could turn the tide. He turned back toward the cathedral, his decision made. As he walked, his shadow stretched long behind him, cast by the glow of the dying fires. a single figure stepping forward to face the storm. At that same moment, the king, high in his tower, watched the rain with a mixture of awe and despair. He realized, too late, the cost of ignoring Ursula's warnings. His kingdom, his people, perhaps even his own soul, hung in the balance now. He whispered a prayer, not for victory, but for forgiveness. Thomas reached the altar. He placed the scroll upon it, and with a steady hand, he lit a single candle. The flame burned bright and steady, untouched by the drafts that swept the great hall. The bell above tolled once more, louder than before, as if to mark the moment. And the ancient stones of the cathedral seemed to hum with unseen power. The storm grew heavier, the rain now falling in torrents, turning the streets of London into rivers of ash and soot. But the fire fought back, hissing and crackling as if defying the heavens themselves. Sparks flew up in defiance, carried on the wind like dying stars. And through it all, the people watched, torn between hope and dread, as the storm waged war with the inferno. Inside the cathedral, Thomas knelt before the altar. His voice rose in chant, ancient words not heard in centuries, the language of the first builders of the city, those who had laid its foundation stones with prayer and blood. Each word seemed to echo, not only through the cathedral, but through time itself. The candle's flame grew higher, brighter, unnaturally so, as though it fed upon the very air of the place. From the heights of the cathedral's bell tower, a figure appeared, the cloaked woman from the square. She moved with a purpose, her silhouette framed by the lightning that tore the sky. She began to ring the great bell with her own hands, each toll shaking the city, as if calling the elements themselves to heed Thomas's plea. Below, the people fell silent. Even the cries of the wounded seemed to fade beneath the sound of the bell and the voice of Thomas. All eyes turned to the cathedral, where the glow of the candle and the flicker of the fires seemed to merge, casting the building in a spectral light. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone, burning wood, and something else, something older, something sacred. Thomas's voice reached its crescendo, his words now a shout over the storm. The scroll before him blackened at the edges, the ancient ink running as though weeping. The candle's flame flared once more, then suddenly extinguished, plunging the cathedral into darkness, save for the lightning flashing through the high stained glass windows. And then, as if the city itself exhaled, the wind shifted. The flames weakened, the rain gained strength. The inferno that had devoured street after street faltered, choked by the storm. From the river to the palace walls, fire gave way to steam. A sound like a sigh passed through London, and in that moment, hope was rekindled. Thomas collapsed at the altar, his strength spent. The cloaked woman descended from the tower, her task complete. Together, they had summoned the storm. Together, they had bought the city a reprieve. But the cost of the ritual would not be known until dawn's light revealed what was lost and what had been saved. As the rain fell harder, steam rose in great billowing clouds, cloaking the ruins of London in an eerie mist. The figures of the citizens moved like shadows, their faces hollow with exhaustion and grief. Yet in their eyes glimmered the fragile spark of survival. Among the wreckage, a child found a scorched doll, clutching it to her chest as though it were the last remnant of her world. Within the cathedral, the cloaked woman knelt beside Thomas, brushing damp hair from his pale face. Her own hands trembled as the toll of her efforts caught up with her. The storm had answered, but at what price? The stained glass around them was shattered, and rain dripped steadily onto the ancient stones. as if the building itself wept for the city. Outside, a group of townsfolk gathered at the base of the cathedral steps. Their leader, a grizzled old merchant with soot in his beard, raised his arm and pointed toward the river. There, through the lifting mist, they saw that the fire's advance had stopped. The city's heart still beat. Cries of relief, mingled with sobs, rippled through the crowd. But not all was well. From the smoldering ruins of the merchant quarter came the sound of falling beams and the crackle of hidden embers. The fire was dying, but not yet dead. A final battle loomed, one that would test the endurance of those who remained. Thomas, regaining his senses, forced himself to rise, leaning heavily on the altar as determination filled his eyes once more. As the sun crested the horizon, its first rays bathed the city in gold and crimson. Thomas stepped out into the light, the cloaked woman at his side. Together they descended the cathedral steps to join the people, and as one, the survivors turned to face what remained of their home. United by loss but bound by hope. A new day had begun, but the scars of the night would never be forgotten. The streets below were slick with rain and ash, the air thick with the mingled scents of wet soot and smoldering timber. Survivors picked their way cautiously through rubble, their faces pale in the dawn's fragile light. A mother, her shawl burned at the edges, guided her children through the ruins, her eyes darting at every sound, every shifting shadow. From the tower of the cathedral, a bell tolled, a deep, mournful sound that echoed across the ruined city. Each chime seemed to mark not only the passing of time, but the loss of something irreplaceable. The people paused, heads bowed, as if honoring the dead whose names they did not yet know. But beneath the sorrow, a spark of resilience flickered. The grizzled merchant stepped forward, raising a blackened flag once flown from his shop. "We rebuild at sunrise," he declared, his voice hoarse but unwavering. Murmurs of agreement rose among the crowd. Broken, but not beaten, the city's survivors found unity in shared purpose. Thomas, now steady on his feet, took the woman's hand, and together they moved among the people, offering comfort where they could. He stopped before a ruined house, its door still smoldering, and knelt to retrieve a charred family portrait. His gaze lingered on it, the weight of the night heavy upon him. In the distance, faint cries rose from the eastern edge of the city. Thomas looked up sharply. The fire had not claimed everything, but nor had it finished its work. Pockets of flame licked stubbornly at the city's outskirts, where desperate families still fought to save what little they had left. Thomas turned to the people gathered at the cathedral. "We go," he said simply, and with that, a new surge of purpose coursed through the weary crowd. The battle for London was not over. The group moved as one, the determined river of humanity flowing through the battered streets. Buckets, blankets, anything that could carry water was pressed into service. Children carried small pails. Old men hauled barrels on creaking carts. The fire crackled and hissed ahead, the enemy that would not rest. At the eastern edge of the city, they found the flames devouring a row of wooden cottages. The fire danced along the rooftops like a living thing, its heat fierce enough to blister the skin. A desperate father beat at the flames with a soaked coat, trying to shield his crying child. Thomas rushed forward without a word, flinging his own coat atop the blaze. For long minutes, chaos reigned. The fires seemed to roar louder, as if defying their efforts. But then, at last, the balance tipped. The fire weakened, hissed in protest, and died in steaming clouds as the people's stubborn fight overwhelmed it. The exhausted crowd broke into weary cheers, their faces streaked with ash, but shining with relief. Thomas leaned against a wall, catching his breath, and scanned the faces around him. Among them stood the cloaked woman, her eyes meeting his. No words passed between them, but in that look was shared understanding. They had saved what they could, and London would rise again. And as the city's bell rang once more, its tone no longer mournful but resolute, Thomas raised his head. "This is not the end," he said softly. "This is the beginning." The camera would fade out on the battered, defiant city as its people began to clear the rubble, rebuild their homes, and reclaim their lives. Proof that even the fiercest fire could not break the human spirit. The inferno now wrapped the castle like a serpent of flame, its coils tightening with every passing moment. Aldrich and his dwindling band found themselves cornered in the inner courtyard, the once grand space now a cauldron of heat and smoke. The great oak doors of the keep creaked and groaned, the iron hinges melting, as if the very bones of the fortress were surrendering to the fire. Yet even as doom seemed certain, Aldrich's gaze found hope. High above the blaze, a banner still flew from the western tower. Tattered, scorched, but defiant, the crest of the city remained. Inspired, he shouted for one final stand, urging his people to form a shield wall at the keep's entrance to protect the last stronghold from the encroaching inferno. Suddenly, a sound pierced the roar of the fire, a horn, faint at first, then louder, clearer. From beyond the city walls, the river's edge, came the answer to Aldrich's unspoken prayer. The people of the outlying villages, rallied by news of the disaster, approached in boats and on horseback, bearing buckets, blankets, anything that could fight the fire. A tide of hope surged toward the burning city. But fate's grip was not yet loosened. With a deafening crash, the western tower, which had borne the city's crest, gave way, toppling into the courtyard in a cascade of stone and flame. Aldrich and his comrades were thrown to the ground, and for a moment all seemed lost. The fire roared in triumph, as if to consume even the last shred of hope. But amid the ruin, Aldrich rose once more, bloodied and burned but unbroken. With the villagers' arrival and the defenders' final stand, together they beat back the flames from the keep. Water doused the smoldering walls, blankets smothered the smaller fires, and the dawn's first light finally broke through the smoke-choked sky. The city, though scarred, still stood. The first light of dawn revealed the scale of the devastation. The once proud city now lay in ruin, its skyline broken, towers shattered, and homes reduced to smoldering husks. But from the ashes rose not silence, but the sound of voices, cries of survivors, calls for loved ones, and the determined shouts of those who would begin the work of rebuilding. Aldrich, leaning heavily on his sword, surveyed the scene, his heart torn between sorrow and resolve. As the sun climbed higher, the river that once seemed a distant hope became the city's lifeline. Lines of villagers, knights, and townsfolk formed human chains, passing buckets of water to extinguish stubborn embers. The elderly and children gathered in makeshift shelters along the city walls, wrapped in cloaks, their faces streaked with soot and tears, watching as their protectors fought to save what remained. Aldrich moved among his people, offering words of comfort and command. He knelt beside a wounded boy, binding a burn with strips torn from his own cloak. He helped lift fallen beams, his strength renewed by the unity he saw in those around him. This was no longer a city of nobles and peasants, knights and craftsmen. This was a family bound by survival. Suddenly, the cry of a scout broke the fragile peace. Riders approached from the south, not foes, but an envoy of allies who had seen the fire from afar and come to aid. Banners of neighboring realms rippled in the breeze, and for the first time in days, Aldrich allowed himself a faint smile. Help had come, and with it, the promise that they would not face this trial alone. The day ended with a solemn gathering in the city square, what was left of it. Here, Aldrich spoke to his people, his voice carrying across the ruined streets. He spoke not of vengeance, but of renewal. He swore an oath beneath the rising stars that the city would be rebuilt, stronger than before, and that the names of the fallen would never be forgotten. The people answered with a cheer that echoed against the broken stones, a sound of life returning. Night once again blanketed the scarred land, but the city did not sleep. Campfires flickered across the ruins, casting long shadows that danced among the broken walls. Amid the quiet hum of whispered plans and prayers, Aldrich sat with the council of elders and commanders. A great map was spread before them, marked with the city's wounds and the enemy's last known movements. But their meeting was interrupted by a sentry's breathless arrival. There were strange lights seen on the horizon, beyond the blackened hills. The scouts dispatched to investigate the lights returned with troubling news. A new force, unknown banners and cloaked figures, had been seen moving under cover of darkness. Who were they? Reinforcements, scavengers, or a new enemy drawn to the city's weakness? Fear began to ripple through the camp, but Aldrich's voice steadied them. He ordered defenses strengthened, watches doubled, and messengers sent to their newfound allies. The night would not find them unprepared. As the night deepened, a strange mist began to creep over the fields, a cold, unnatural fog that muffled sound and dulled the light of their fires. From its depths came whispers, unearthly voices that seemed to call out in forgotten tongues. Some of the younger soldiers crossed themselves, while the older folk muttered prayers or curses. Aldrich, heart pounding, knew the city's true test had only just begun. Then came the first sighting, a figure stepping from the fog, neither living nor dead. Clad in tattered armor, its hollow eyes glowed faintly like embers. It raised a rusted sword in silent challenge, and from the mist behind it came more. A spectral host, as if the city's past dead had risen to defend or damn it. The defenders hesitated, gripped by the horror of the impossible. Aldrich stepped forward, sword drawn, his voice rising above the growing wail of the night. He called to his people to stand firm, that this was their land, their home, and no ghost or invader would take it from them. With a roar, the defenders rallied, and the fog-shrouded field erupted into a battle both physical and spiritual, steel clashing against specter, courage against ancient dread. The battle raged in the ghostly mist, every sound muffled and strange. Aldrich felt as if he fought in a dream, his sword slicing through cold air as spectral foes dissolved and reformed. Around him, his warriors fought bravely, their shouts drowned in the wail of the wind. Then, a terrible cry echoed, not of man or ghost, but something deeper, older. From the heart of the fog rose a giant figure, cloaked in shadow, crowned with horns of bone. Panic rippled through the ranks. Some turned to flee, but Aldrich called them back, rallying them with words of ancestors and honor. As the giant specter advanced, the earth beneath their feet trembled. From the far side of the field came a blinding white light, an answering force. The Lady of the Vale, thought to be only legend, appeared, her silver cloak billowing, her staff raised high. The lady's voice rang clear, a song of ancient power. The mist began to retreat, shredded by the purity of her light. The spectral host faltered, their forms flickering like candle flames in a storm. But the horned giant roared in defiance, striking the ground with a massive staff of twisted wood and bone. summoning the spirits back to his side. Aldrich and the lady fought side by side now, man and myth united. Together they pressed forward, forcing the enemy back step by step. But just as hope swelled, the ground beneath the city shuddered violently. Stones cracked, and from beneath the ancient streets, a deeper darkness seeped, something sealed long ago, now disturbed by the battle's fury. The horned giant gave one final, deafening cry and vanished, his army melting with him, leaving the defenders shaken but victorious. For now, yet all knew the battle was far from over. Whatever had stirred beneath the city was rising, and its hunger was greater than that of any ghost. The chapter ended not in relief, but with the chill of what was yet to come. The battlefield fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors and the soft hiss of the retreating mist. Aldrich stood still, sword lowered, staring at the cracked ground where the horned giant had vanished. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what lay ahead. The Lady of the Veil placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with sadness. Whispers began to rise from the chasm, voices ancient and mournful, as if the city's forgotten dead called out from below. The air grew colder, and a strange, sulphurous smell drifted upward. The surviving soldiers drew back, glancing at one another with unspoken dread. Some clutched talismans or muttered prayers, while others simply froze, transfixed by the darkness. Aldrich knelt at the chasm's edge, listening. Beneath the earth, something moved, massive, slow, and full of malice. The lady's voice was soft, urgent. "It is the sleeper. We have awoken it." At those words, the ground trembled again, and from the depths came a rumbling like distant thunder. A deep, guttural growl rolled up through the stone, shaking the very air. Suddenly, a blast of searing heat erupted from the fissure, sending warriors stumbling back. Flames licked at the edges of the broken stones. The lady raised her staff, casting a protective barrier of shimmering light to shield the men. The sleeper's voice rose from below, a voice like grinding stone and ancient sorrow, promising doom upon those who disturbed its slumber. The city above began to crumble, rooftops collapsing, towers leaning precariously as the ground quaked. Aldrich shouted for an organized retreat. "To the citadel! Regroup and hold the walls!" But even as they fled, the knowledge weighed on them. The true battle was only beginning, and the enemy this time was no specter, but an ancient power bound beneath the earth itself. As dawn's pale light touched the horizon, Aldrich stood upon the citadel walls, watching the city below burn and crumble. The sleeper's growl echoed faintly beneath his feet. Beside him, the Lady of the Veil whispered, "This is but the first shadow. The deeper darkness is yet to come." And in his heart, Aldrich knew they would need more than steel to survive what was awakening. Within the shattered city, the once majestic stone lanes of Eldhollow now burned with unnatural fire. Market stalls lay overturned, the cries of panicked citizens blending with the low, pulsating groan that seemed to echo from the very bones of the earth. The smell of scorched parchment and melting iron filled the air as towers wept molten tears. From beneath the city center, the old royal square, crimson light burst forth in blinding pulses. The ground shattered upward like glass under pressure, and through the smoke, a massive, shadowy figure began to rise. Not entirely physical, not fully spirit, but something ancient. Its form was wrapped in chains forged by time, burning as if resisting its own awakening. People screamed not just from fear, but from the voices invading their minds. The sleeper did not speak aloud. It entered the minds of those too close, flooding them with images of a world twisted by darkness. Forests of bone, skies of fire, rivers that whispered names of the dead. Many dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, begging for silence. The royal temple, once a place of light, was the first to fall. Its great stained glass window shattered outward, and a beam of shadow lanced into the heavens, blotting out the rising sun. Gargoyles animated, turning on their stone perches with glowing eyes, leaping into the streets in a frenzy. The magic binding the old places was unraveling. On the outer wall, Aldrich watched with clenched fists as the nightmare unfolded. "The city is lost," one of the generals whispered, but Aldrich shook his head. "No, not lost, not yet." Behind them, the Lady of the Veil chanted an ancient incantation, her hands glowing, trying to conjure a barrier across the citadel's gate. But even her voice trembled. Then it came, from the broken pit where the city square had been. The sleeper rose in full. Towering above the rooftops, its body shimmered between flesh and smoke, its eyes ancient furnaces of hate. The chains around its limbs snapped, each one sounding like a bell toll for the end of the world. It let out a roar that wasn't sound, but a wave of despair, blanketing the city in silence and dread. And then it moved, slow at first like a giant learning to breathe again. Each step cracked the stone beneath it. Each breath sent clouds of black ash into the air. It reached down and with a flick of its claw, obliterated the western tower of the city, like a child knocking over a toy. The rebellion, the soldiers, even magic itself, seemed small now. The survivors of Eldhollow gathered behind the battered citadel walls, the last line between them and the sleeper's wrath. The city below was a ruin of flame and shadow, but here, in this final refuge, Aldrich and the Lady of the Veil stood before what remained of their people. Their faces were hollow with grief, but their eyes burned with resolve. Aldrich's voice rang out over the hushed crowd. "We do not fight for walls or stone. We fight for each other. For every child hiding beneath these stones. For every memory this city holds. If we fall as one." His words ignited a spark in the hearts of the weary. Soldiers straightened their backs, peasants gripped tools as weapons, and mages whispered their readiness. Below, the sleeper advanced, slow but unstoppable. With every step, the earth trembled, and the sky seemed to darken further. Arcs of black lightning cracked from its form, setting new fires. Yet in the citadel, plans formed swiftly, hidden tunnels, traps of ancient magic, desperate rites whispered by the Lady of the Veil. Night fell again, though the sleeper made the stars seem dim. In the blackness, scouts returned with news. The creature would reach the citadel by dawn. The air was thick with dread, but also with grim determination. Aldrich met with his closest captains in the torchlit war room. Their faces gaunt but fierce. Maps were spread, and fingers traced desperate strategies. Outside on the wall, a young archer named Kellen knelt, whispering a prayer to gods long silent. His hands trembled, but he nocked his arrow and stared into the night where the sleeper loomed like a mountain of darkness. And in the quiet, the first light of hope appeared, a distant glimmer as the first reinforcements from the outer provinces crested the horizon, drawn by the fires and the legend of the sleeper's awakening. As the reinforcements approached, Aldrich allowed himself a small, grim smile. The battle was far from won, but the final stand of Eldhollow would not be made alone. The last bastion would hold, or it would fall with defiance that would be remembered for all time. The citadel's walls groaned under the weight of so many souls clinging to hope. Inside, families huddled in ancient halls, mothers whispering lullabies to calm their children's trembling hearts. The flicker of candlelight revealed faces hollow with fear, but also a shared unspoken vow to endure. The Lady of the Veil moved among them, offering what comfort she could, her presence a reminder that not all hope was lost. Aldrich stood atop the eastern battlements, watching as the sleeper drew closer. The monstrous figure paused, as if sensing the final refuge of the city's last defenders. With a roar that shook the heavens, it raised its arms, and dark fire poured from its hands, raining upon the fields between it and the citadel, turning them into a sea of molten ruin. Aldrich clenched the hilt of his sword so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The sleeper's magic reached the citadel walls, and the ancient stones began to crack under the assault. Mages in the towers raised their staves, weaving desperate shields of light to buy precious minutes. Their spells clashed with the sleeper's power, the night sky exploding with arcs of gold and violet. Within the citadel's forge, blacksmiths labored through the night, fashioning arrows tipped with silver and blades inscribed with runes of binding. Their hammers rang like a battle cry, each strike a defiance of despair. Nearby, healers prepared salves, potions, and charms, knowing the dawn would bring blood. As dawn approached, Aldrich gathered his captains beneath the broken banners of Eldhollow. His voice was steady. We face a storm no city should endure, but we are the shield that stands between the sleeper and all free folk beyond these walls. Hold fast. Fight as if the eyes of history are upon you, for they are. His captains bowed, their resolve hardened. And as the first light of dawn broke through the storm clouds, the sleeper's shadow fell across the citadel gates. The battle for the last bastion was about to begin. The sleeper did not rush its assault. Instead, it advanced with terrifying purpose, as if savoring the dread it sowed. Each step it took seemed to make the earth itself shudder, ancient stones cracking beneath its weight. The ground between the citadel and the monster blackened, as if life recoiled from its presence. From the highest towers, watchers rang the bells of warning, a sound that had not echoed through Eldhollow in 100 years. Meanwhile, in the barracks, the city's remaining defenders prepared for what would surely be their last battle. Old soldiers tightened worn armor. Young recruits exchanged glances filled with fear and resolve. A veteran named Brand took up the horn of the city, a relic rarely used, ready to sound the charge when the gates fell. On the outer wall, archers notched silver-tipped arrows, their fingers trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what approached. Their captain paced behind them, whispering encouragement, reminding them to aim for the eyes, the mouth, the weak points that might exist in such a monstrous being. The sleeper lifted its massive head, and from its maw came a roar so deafening that the stones of Eldhollow seemed to vibrate with it. With that roar, it summoned lesser horrors, twisted creatures born of shadow and flame that poured forth from the scorched earth, racing toward the citadel walls. The true battle had begun. The first wave of horror slammed against the outer walls like a living tide. Shadow beasts leapt onto the ramparts, clawing at defenders with talons of pure night. Flames erupted where their bodies touched stone, setting portions of the battlements ablaze. Arrows fell like rain, but many passed through the shadowy forms, striking nothing but air. The soldiers fought with grim determination, blades flashing in the dim light, cutting down any beast solid enough to bleed. Below, the citadel's great gates trembled as the sleeper's lesser spawn hurled themselves against it. The enchanted wood groaned, but held for now. Inside the courtyard, healers and squires rushed between the wounded, dragging them to makeshift shelters. The air was thick with smoke and the copper tang of blood. On the western parapet, Lady Ceres, captain of the guard, rallied a dwindling band of warriors. Her voice rang clear over the din. "Hold! We hold here, or we fall everywhere." She wielded a gleaming spear, its point blazing with runes, striking down a beast that dared scale the wall. Blood, if it could be called that, splattered across the stones, black and steaming. And still the sleeper came on, slow but inexorable like the grinding of mountains. Each of its steps shattered the earth, sending tremors through the very foundations of the citadel. From its towering form, tendrils of darkness lashed out, striking towers and walls, weaving ruin in their wake. Lightning split the sky again and again, the storm seemingly drawn to the creature's presence. Within the great hall, Aldrich knelt before the sacred altar, hands trembling as he placed the ancient crown of Eldhollow upon his brow. It was a symbol not of power, but of final duty. He rose, sword in hand, prepared to lead the final defense. The hall, once a place of feasts and celebration, now echoed with the hush of fate. A silence fell, a dreadful, heavy silence, as if the world itself held its breath. Then came the sleeper's touch, its massive claw, forged of nightmare and void, extended with a slow, terrible grace and pressed against the citadel's great gates. The ancient wood, reinforced with runes of protection and iron from the mountain's heart, groaned like a dying beast. Sparks of magical energy crackled along the sigils, struggling in vain to hold. The claw pushed, and the gates, proud guardians for 100 generations, began to splinter. With a final, deafening crack, the gates gave way. They burst inward, reduced to a storm of shards and molten iron. The force of the destruction blasted through the courtyard, sending defenders sprawling. A shockwave of darkness rolled across the stones, extinguishing torches, flattening tents, and snuffing out hope. The sleeper stepped forward, ducking its horned head beneath the shattered arch, its form filling the gateway like night made flesh. Aldrich emerged onto the inner steps, sword raised high. His voice, steady despite the terror before him, rang out. "To me, stand with me, let no evil pass." His words rallied the scattered defenders, who formed a desperate line at the base of the stairs, a wall of blades and shields. Above them, the sleeper loomed, its eyes like burning coals in a sea of shadow, regarding these last defenders as one might regard ants. The battle was joined. The sleeper's tendrils lashed out, striking like lightning, shattering stone and steel alike. But the defenders met them with fire and fury, swords glowing with runes, spears shattering on impact, yet still they fought. The ground ran black with the ichor of the lesser spawn that poured in through the broken gates. The clash of steel on shadow echoed like thunder through the dying night. Above, the sky split open as if mourning the fall of Eldhollow. Rain poured in sheets, mingling with blood and ash. The sleeper raised its head and unleashed a roar that shook the heavens themselves, a sound of rage, of hunger, of inevitable doom. And in that roar was a promise that this night would end in shadow unless a miracle intervened. The sleeper advanced, each massive step sending tremors through the ruined courtyard. The ground beneath its feet blackened and cracked, as if rejecting the weight of this living nightmare. The defenders fell back, retreating toward the last gate of the inner keep, a gate adorned with ancient symbols of protection. now flickering like dying embers against the encroaching dark. The storm above raged, as though the heavens themselves wept for Eldhollow's fall. Aldrich, soaked to the bone, planted his banner at the gate. The standard of Eldhollow, its colors smeared with mud and blood, but still standing. Beside him, archers loosed enchanted arrows that burst into blue fire as they struck the sleeper's hide, leaving barely a mark. The sleeper's tendrils writhed and snapped, tearing down battlements, hurling men aside like rag dolls. And still they fought, the last sons and daughters of Eldhollow, determined to hold the line. The inner gate shuddered under the sleeper's assault, ancient wood and steel groaning as dark magic seeped through every crack. A chorus of voices rose in defiance, priests and mages chanting forgotten wards, their hands glowing with desperate power. The air crackled, light against shadow, hope against despair, but the sleeper's hunger was endless, and its will unbroken. The gate splintered bit by bit under the relentless pounding of claw and tendril. And then came the breach. With a roar that seemed to shake the soul itself, the sleeper shattered the inner gate. The pieces flew like missiles, striking down friend and foe alike. Darkness poured into the keep's last refuge, a flood of shadow and malice. Aldrich led the charge one final time, sword ablaze with the last magic of Eldhollow, his cry a beacon in the storm. For Eldhollow, for the light. The final stand had begun. Steel clashed with shadow, magic blazed against the void, and above it all, the sleeper's vast form loomed, a living darkness swallowing the last hope of Eldhollow. But still, they fought, not because they believed they could win, but because to surrender would be to lose all that they were. The inner keep lay in ruin. The sleeper now towered within its walls, its tendrils coiling around broken towers, tearing at the last defenses. Fires burned unchecked, their light flickering on rain-slick stone. The storm above raged harder, as if mourning the fall of Eldhollow's heart. Amidst the chaos, the survivors regrouped, a scattered band of knights, mages, and common folk, bloodied but undowed. Aldrich, barely standing, rallied the last of his warriors. His voice rang out through the smoke and storm, a cry not of victory, but of defiance. We stand as long as breath remains. Let the sleeper choke on our fury. Around him, shields were raised, spells were readied, and blades glinted in the firelight. They would meet the end as free folk. The sleeper advanced, slow and unstoppable, crushing stone beneath its weight. From deep within its void-like core, it began to whisper, a voice like the grave, promising oblivion, offering release. The defenders felt its pull, their wills tested, but none turned aside. The sleeper's tendrils lashed out, striking with the force of battering rams, and the final battle was joined. Then from beneath the keep came a rumble. The last of the court mages, hidden below, unleashed their final gamble, a seismic spell to bring the ancient foundations down upon the sleeper. The ground split, the walls cracked, and stone began to fall. The sleeper reeled, its form struggling against the collapse. The keep itself would be the weapon. As the keep fell inward, the storm above broke in a final crescendo of thunder and rain. The sleeper's form was swallowed by the ruin, buried beneath centuries of stone and magic. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the few who remained standing. They had won, not through might, but through sacrifice. Eldhollow was lost, but the sleeper's hunger had been denied. For now, the storm's fury reached its peak as the sleeper breached the inner keep. Its form was immense, larger now, fed by the fear and destruction it had sown. Tendrils as thick as ancient oaks crashed through battlements, tearing at the final defenses. The stone itself seemed to weep beneath its weight. Every bolt of lightning revealed more of its horror. A shape without true form, endlessly shifting, a maw of shadows and endless hunger. Below, the last defenders stood on broken ground. Fires raged around them, casting flickering light on faces etched with terror and determination. The air was thick with ash, the taste of defeat heavy on every tongue. Aldrich limped forward, his armor battered and cracked, but his spirit unbroken. His voice rose above the storm. "We will not yield. This is our home, and it shall not fall while we stand." His words sparked a last ember of courage. The knights formed a battered shield wall. Mages gathered their strength, weaving protective wards. Arrows, what few remained, were nocked and aimed at the creature's core, though all knew it would not be enough. The sleeper struck. Tendrils lashed out with brutal force, smashing through the shield wall, sending warriors flying like rag dolls. Stone crumbled, towers collapsed in on themselves, and yet the defenders fought. Blades bit deep into the beast's shadowy limbs. Spells seared its form, but it pressed on, unstoppable. Its voice filled the air, whispers layered upon whispers, offering release, promising peace in oblivion. Many faltered, their minds drowning in the void song of the sleeper. But Aldrich roared, his fury cutting through the despair. "Hold the line! Remember who you are." Suddenly, a great tremor shook the keep. From the depths, a booming chant rose. The last mages in the catacombs had unleashed the doomsday spell. The earth itself seemed to cry out as ancient magic tore through the foundations. Great cracks raced up the walls, towers leaned, then collapsed in thunderous ruin. The sleeper recoiled, tendrils thrashing wildly as its foothold gave way. The defenders realized what was happening. The keep itself had become the weapon. Aldrich made eye contact with his surviving comrades. No words were needed. Together, they charged into the storm, blades and magic aimed at the heart of the horror, determined to see the end through. Stone fell around them. The very walls they defended now sealed their doom, and the sleepers. At last, with a sound like the world breaking, the inner keep collapsed fully, entombing the sleeper beneath untold tons of stone and ancient spells. The storm's fury broke, the rain washing over the steaming rubble. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the few who still stood. Eldhollow was gone, but the sleeper's hunger had been denied. For now. The wind roared like a wounded beast as the sleeper's tendrils withdrew for a moment, sensing the shifting of the ground beneath it. The defenders, though broken and battered, felt a flicker of hope. Was the great horror faltering? Yet, as lightning tore across the heavens, they saw the sleeper adapt. Its form became leaner, more fluid, pouring itself like liquid shadow through the crumbling gaps in the keep's walls. It was seeking the heart of the fortress, the sanctum where the last surviving relics of Eldhollow's magic were hidden. Inside the sanctum, the eldest mage, Master Corwin, stood before an ancient stone altar, hands raised high, voice hoarse from chanting. Around him, magical symbols glowed, carved deep into the stone centuries ago. The air crackled with power as the final ward was activated. A sphere of blinding white light. But as the sleeper's shadow fell across the chamber, the light dimmed, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of its malevolence. The ancient magic was strong, but so too was the hunger of the sleeper. Aldrich, bloodied and limping, reached the sanctum's threshold just as the sleeper struck. A tendril shot forward, shattering the altar, scattering the glowing stones, and hurling Corwin against the far wall. The protective light flickered, then died, but Aldrich did not hesitate. With a cry that was half rage, half despair, he hurled himself at the tendril, driving his sword deep into the coiling shadow. The sleeper shrieked, a sound that split the air and shook loose what little stones still stood. The mages who remained, seeing Aldrich's defiance, rallied. Broken staves were raised, voices lifted in a final, desperate incantation. The floor of the sanctum cracked apart, and from deep within the earth rose a pillar of raw, untamed energy. One last surge of Eldhollow's ancient power. The sleeper tried to withdraw, but the magic wrapped around it like chains, dragging it down. The keep was finished. With a deafening roar, the final walls gave way, the ground swallowing both the sleeper and the sanctum. Dust and light filled the sky, the storm clouds breaking apart to reveal a blood-red dawn. Silence reigned, broken only by the mournful wind. The survivors stood in the rubble, too stunned to cheer, too weary to weep. The sleeper was gone, or so they prayed. But in the deep places of the earth, something still stirred. The storm's fury had passed, leaving behind a sky streaked with crimson and gold as dawn broke over the ruins of Eldhollow. Smoke coiled lazily from shattered towers. The once mighty inner keep lay buried beneath tons of stone and earth. The survivors, fewer than anyone could have imagined, moved through the rubble in stunned silence. Every footstep crunched on ash and bone. The air was heavy, the world holding its breath. Aldrich, leaning on a shattered spear for support, gazed into the massive crater where the sanctum had stood. A faint mist rose from the depths, and within it, shapes seemed to shift, too fluid, too dark. He felt it before he heard it. A low, pulsing hum, like the heartbeat of something vast and waiting. His grip tightened on the spear, his instincts screaming that their ordeal was far from over. Elsewhere among the ruins, Master Corwin, his robes torn and face pale with exhaustion, examined the surviving fragments of the altar. The runes still glowed faintly, but their light seemed to flicker in warning rather than relief. He traced the symbols with trembling fingers, realizing that the binding spell had not destroyed the sleeper. It had only driven it deeper, into the dark veins of the earth, where it could heal and grow stronger. From beneath the ruins came a sound that froze the blood of all who heard it, a deep, resonant groan, as though the earth itself were mourning. Birds fled the trees, and the ground trembled once more. Tiny fissures snaked outward from the crater, and through them rose tendrils of mist, blacker than night. The sleeper's voice echoed faintly, not in words, but in hunger. Panic rippled through the survivors as the ground beneath their feet quaked. Some fled toward the outer gates, others dropped to their knees, praying to forgotten gods. But Aldrich stood firm, his voice ringing out above the chaos. To the walls, prepare what defenses you can. We must not let it rise again. His words brought a flicker of resolve to the broken company. Men and women gathered what weapons remained, forming a ragged line against the darkness creeping from below. The final moments of the chapter unfold in eerie stillness. The mist thickens, swallowing the ruins, the defenders, even the dawn light itself. And then, from deep within the earth, a single eye opens, vast, ancient, and filled with endless night. The sleeper was not destroyed. It was only beginning to awaken. The black mist spread across the scorched stones like a living thing, slipping through the cracks of shattered towers, curling around broken statues and seeping into the earth itself. Wherever it touched, the stones blackened as if burned anew. The survivors, choking on the sulfurous stench that rose with it, stumbled backward, eyes wide with horror, as the ruin seemed to dissolve into shadow. A strange, hollow sound echoed, neither voice nor beast, just a resonant vibration that rattled the bones of all who heard it. Master Corwin collapsed to his knees, pressing his hands to the earth, trying in vain to sense the sleeper's true form. His mind touched the outer edges of an ancient will, vast and cold as the void between stars, and he recoiled as if burned. "It's not just waking," he gasped. "It's calling to something deeper." Aldrich rallied the last of the defenders atop a fractured wall, the stones beneath them trembling. The mist coiled at their feet, and from it rose shapes, mocking echoes of the city's dead. Phantom knights in rusted armor, spectral faces of former friends and kin, their eyes empty and accusing. The living recoiled, some dropping their weapons in despair. But Aldrich's voice cut through the terror. "These are not your fallen. These are lies of the sleeper. Stand with me, or all is lost." Suddenly, from deep within the crater, a massive tremor cracked the earth, and the mist erupted upward like a geyser. From the darkness below, vast tendrils of something neither flesh nor smoke reached toward the surface, clawing for purchase. The entire city seemed to tilt, the ground giving way as if Eldhollow were being drawn into a bottomless chasm. The dawn light vanished beneath the tide of shadow. Master Corwin, with his final strength, began weaving a barrier of light. A lattice of ancient sigils suspended in the air, glowing brighter as the darkness pressed closer. The runes sparked and hissed as shadow touched them, buying precious moments for the survivors to retreat toward the outermost walls. But even Corwin knew this was a delay, not a salvation. The sleeper's hunger could not be denied forever. Then, for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The mist fell still, the tendrils froze, and from the chasm below came a single, deafening pulse of energy, a soundless roar that shook the heavens. Every torch, every ember of fire, every spell light in Eldhollow flickered out. The sleeper had seen them, and it would not stop. From the edges of the collapsing city, strange lights began to flicker in the sky, aurora-like streams of emerald and violet that rippled unnaturally, as if the heavens themselves were bending under sleeper's awakening will. Birds fell silent. The air tasted of ash and ozone. Those who dared to look up felt the weight of unseen eyes peering down through the shifting colors. A low chant seemed to rise from beneath the ground, not of any tongue known to men, but a chorus of layered voices, as if the stones, the roots, even the bones of the fallen sang in unison. The sound gnawed at the sanity of those who heard it. Aldrich felt his knees weaken, his grip on his spear loosen. Only sheer will kept him standing as the chorus rose louder, rattling the shattered city like a drum of doom. Master Corwin, now pale and trembling, saw visions in the mist, cities lost to time, realms consumed by the same darkness, their people erased as if they had never been. The sleeper was no mere beast. It was a remnant of a forgotten age, a hunger that had devoured worlds before Eldhollow. "We are but the next in line," he whispered, his voice lost beneath the roar of the chorus. The barrier of runes above the crater cracked at last, threads of light snapping like breaking glass. A scream echoed, not from any throat, but from the very air, as the first true form of the sleeper began to rise. A massive silhouette with shifting edges, part mist, part bone, part endless night. Its shape defied reason, impossible angles folding upon themselves as it climbed toward the surface. Desperation spread like fire. Some fled, vanishing into the night. Others fell to their knees, praying to forgotten gods. Aldrich, his voice hoarse, called to his warriors one last time. If this is our end, let us meet it standing. Let Eldhollow's name be remembered. And for a heartbeat, they rallied, forming a broken but defiant line as the sleeper loomed above. The night sky was gone. Where once stars blinked coldly over Eldhollow, now only a void remained. A swirling blackness where the sleeper's form spread its wings of shadow across the heavens. Its tendrils reached down, brushing the tallest towers, pulling them apart like straw huts. The ground trembled under the weight of its presence. Master Corwin stood atop the shattered walls of the inner keep, his staff glowing faintly against the darkness. He chanted in a language older than the city itself, weaving what fragile magics remained. His voice cracked, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth. But he did not falter. Beside him, Aldrich led the last of the defenders, men and women too stubborn to flee, too brave to surrender. The sleeper let out a sound that was less a roar and more a collapse of reality, a wave of force that flattened what remained of Eldhollow's outer defenses. Walls crumbled, the last towers fell, but through the dust and ruin, Aldrich and his warriors advanced, their war cries thin but unbroken. They struck at the sleeper's tendrils, slashing at the impossible flesh, knowing their blades could not pierce the void, but striking all the same. Then, from the heart of the ruin, a forgotten power awoke. Beneath the keep, the ancient wards, left by Eldhollow's founders, those who had once sealed the sleeper, flickered back to life. Glyphs hidden in the bedrock shone like embers, lines of force rising in a lattice of light, binding the sleeper's form in place for but a moment. Corwin, with the last of his strength, drove his staff into the earth. The light of the ward surged, a final gambit that would either seal the sleeper or consume all. Aldrich, seeing the moment, gathered the surviving defenders for one last charge. Not for victory, but to buy Corwin the seconds he needed. A blinding flash, a sound like the cracking of the world, and then silence. The sleeper was gone. Where it had stood, only a vast crater remained, its edges glowing faintly with the last light of the wards. Eldhollow lay in ruin, but the terror had passed. Dawn's first light crept over the horizon, casting its pale glow on the broken stones and the bodies of the brave. And so ends the tale of Eldhollow's last stand, a city destroyed to save the world. Its heroes remembered in the winds that still whisper through the ruins. But far beyond, in the dark between stars, something stirs, watching, waiting. The story is not yet done. Thank you for joining this epic journey into the fall of Eldhollow. If you enjoyed this legend of courage, sacrifice, and cosmic horror, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Many more tales of myths, monsters, and forgotten heroes await you in the next story. Stay tuned.